Today we're talking graphic novels and why they're a filmmaker's best friend. Stick around. What's up guys, I am Rob Federick and welcome back to my channel. I am a film director with over 20 years of experience. I started professionally when I was very young and I've directed music videos for every major record label. I've directed commercials nationally and internationally and have award-winning short films, and I've directed feature films as well. And my goal with this channel has always been to empower you with the tools that you need to elevate your filmmaking capabilities to new heights and new levels. And today we're gonna be discussing why graphic novels are a filmmaker's best friend. So guys, this one's probably gonna be a little bit of a shorter one today, but I really wanted to get into the depths as to why graphic novels are such a valuable tool for filmmakers across the board. If you're a filmmaker, videographer, content creator, whatever you want to call yourself, graphic novels are an amazing resource. So a couple of things, right? One of the things is obviously they are a great source of inspiration, right? Graphic novels serve as an amazing storytelling tool. There are all sorts of stories across all genres, across the board. There is infinite amounts of different stories that you guys can draw inspiration from, and they're really entertaining. I mean, if you're a visual storyteller, I think that these things provide a lot of entertainment value, and they're really fun to kind of kick back with and read. So on top of them being a great source of inspiration for filmmakers, the main key point is that it is a visual storytelling tool. And it tells stories through images, which is what you guys do, right? If you can tell a story with a few still images visually and compellingly, you've done an amazing job of engaging an audience. And with filmmakers, that is the same exact responsibility. And the idea being that graphic novels are very selective in their approach of how they tell stories, because guess what, guys? Drawing takes time. And most artists don't want to draw 700 images to make one scene. They may want to do 30, 20, right? But the idea is they want to keep moving the action forward so that the story is always compelling. Nobody wants to read 80 pages of dialogue fluff, all right? You want to be engaged, you want to follow along with the story. But let's dive in a little bit deeper and look at the aspects, the overall aspects of visual storytelling and why it is so compelling for graphic novels and why it's going to help you as filmmakers. Well, this is basically a storyboard, guys. You know, a lot of filmmakers draw storyboards ahead of time, which are basically a comic book version of your film. And so that you plan out and map out your shot list accordingly to tell the stories in the most compelling way possible. Well, with graphic novels, you get a lot of that. So if you study them and understand how story progresses through those images, you'll realize sort of like what shot selections are most important at any given moment for any scene that you're working on. For example, we have this really great opening scene over here, right, where we have an establishing shot of this sort of landscape, and then we see these boots right here, right? And then we have this character, and then sort of these close-ups of the character and sort of his dialogue right here, right? And why is that an important sequence? Well, if you were doing this in film, you would have an establishing shot of this environment, and then all of a sudden you see these boots step into frame with these paws, right? And what does that do for the audience? Well, even if you're reading it or seeing it visually on a film, it creates a sort of intrigue. Who am I about to meet, right? That is a character trait of introduction. And if you guys look at movies like Indiana Jones, for example, or Bond, right? Any 007 movie, anytime they introduce these characters, there's always a very defining character moment that is shot on screen to really present the character in a heroic or compelling way. Those are all character moments that define a really interesting way of presenting a character to an audience. And in graphic novels, they do the same thing. So you're seeing these boots, sort of this like arrival right here, which is about creating intrigue. And then boom, you get the full reveal of the character. And then they go in close right here, right, to see his face, and then he delivers one line of dialogue. As a visual storytelling technique, this is fantastic, right? Because as filmmakers, we want to do the exact same thing with our characters. How do you establish your characters? How do you present them? How do you want to capture it visually, right? You don't have to copy this exact formula, but it's going to give you a guide as to, I found that interesting. Maybe I can do something different myself. Maybe it's not his boots that I show, but maybe I'll show his hands, and they're very rugged and rough and calloused because this character tends to work out in, the harshest environment and fight and battle, and, his hands wouldn't be soft. So I want to make sure that I show his rugged hands before all of a sudden introducing this brute of a barbarian character. Things like that to think about. The other thing about graphic novels that you really have to pay attention to too is the visual storytelling through composition and lighting. You might say, well, what do you mean lighting? It's a 2D image. There's no lighting in there. It's drawn. Well, in order to draw well and create dimension, right, you have to understand lighting and shading. And these graphic novels actually have it down to a science, right? Like, for example, this guy's out in the sunset. You see these highlights that are reflecting sort of the orange sky. And there's a very strong key light source right here on his face and sort of a more filled shaded spot on this one, right? So that creates dimension and realism, but you're using light sources to tell a story in a certain way to establish a certain mood, right? Studying images like this is gonna help your lighting infinitely because artists have to study lighting themselves to be able to execute things like this. In this image, for example, you see these great bulging muscle shots, right? But like you see the highlight sources are coming all from the top because he's got this big flaming sword. His muscles look really ripped because they're top lit, and it creates shadows underneath, which make the muscles appear bigger and more menacing. So it's cool to look at images like this to establish sort of, lighting direction, color, temperature, and tone. For example, in these images, we have an underlit source. So all of the lighting in this scene is sort of high contrast because it has, it's reflecting light from the bottom. So they're underlit like this, and all the top is sort of shadowed in contrast to create sort of a moody sort of vibe that they're in this volcano area or whatever. But you have to think about things like this. And when you study images like that, you're really going to understand a really good sense of sort of lighting direction and where to put your light sources to accomplish a certain type of look. The important thing too is that there's a visual style. In terms of lighting, there's also a visual style that graphic novels employ. For example, if we look at Saga, it is a much more bright and colorful sort of sci-fi vibe, right? There's like these really great sort of not contrasty images. They're very bright, they're very colorful, and very vibrant. There is a lot of like color information here, and it just kind of sets a tone and a vibe for the entire series, right? And that's a really great art selection choice by Fiona Staples, who designed this. But then we have Velvet, for example, which is a spy thriller, and it has more of a film noir high contrast look to it, right? So a lot of scenes take place at night. There's a lot of contrast and dark moments in the novel itself, a lot of very dark scenes and sort of this like washed out sort of color palette that skews more towards the greens and the blues and the cool colors, right? There's not a lot of warmth or vibrant images like there is in Saga, right? Like it is very sort of washed out. They even blurred out foreground elements to create a sense of depth of field for you to really kind of digest these images as if they were television, right? Or film. But there is a lot of stark contrast in this because this particular book is more about sort of a realistic espionage thriller. If you look at one like Birthright, which is fantasy oriented, again, you have a lot of color vibrancy, but it's a lot grittier than you would see in Saga. There's still a lot more contrast in the image. And this one is more particularly to reflect like these amazing sort of monsters that come from this world of Terranos, where this story takes place, because it's a very rugged environment. And so the art style is sort of rugged to match the tone of the story. So why does that help with filmmaking? Well, when you set out to make your film, what is the tone of your film? What is the tone of anything that you're capturing? Do you want to have higher contrast images? Do you want to have more vibrant colors? It's really up to you to decide, but as a great source of inspiration, you can see what sort of color palettes you want to do, what shot compositions you want to look at, and how they particularly tell any given story and sort of how it reflects the tone and the mood of the story that's being presented to you, which is the same thing you should do when making your films. So we've talked a lot about the visual side of graphic novels, but what about the last little detail that I want to touch on, which is the writing? Yeah, graphic novels obviously provide great images that tell the story, but at the end of the day, you still have to write a story that is going to be played out in these images that we're seeing. And a lot of the times you need to do that through dialogue. and they are very dialogue-heavy stories, right? Again, like artists being selective in what they're going to represent in their story, the writers of these graphic novels also have to be very selective in their dialogue choices and what they're going to use to reflect and propel the story forward. But the important thing is that great dialogue is central to filmmaking and a story. If you look at Tarantino's work, yeah, his dialogue tends to be long, but it is so compelling and interesting, and it always propels the story forward in a direction, and it keeps you engaged, that he is considered one of the masters of dialogue in film. Also, you have to look at the writing execution of how the story is presented. Yes, the artist did select the images and the number of images that they had to draw in order to tell the story, but the writer also is many times writing it out like a script and is describing the action to the artist that then the artist represents on the image. So it all again starts with the page and how to tell the compelling story and how your scene is going to play out visually. Look at the graphic novel from a standpoint of the writing. Once you've kind of read through it and you enjoyed it and you process the dialogue, go back and read it again and sort of see, well, what did the writer do here? How did they represent the story through the images that were told and the dialogue that was displayed? And how did the artist represent all of that in a concise manner that propelled the story forward and kept me engaged? And you guys will be doing the same amount of things with your films. But what you want to show the audience visually to engage them, and how to make those shots as interesting as possible. All right, guys, that'll do it for today on how graphic novels are a filmmaker's best friend. I have left links to these novels in the description below for Saga, Y: The Last Man, and Birthright, which are some of my favorites. If you haven't already, please check them out. They're fantastic. And if you guys have any recommendations or graphic novels that spoke to you in particular, definitely drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear about them and check them out myself. And if you guys have any requests or things you want to learn about in the next video, definitely drop that in there too. I'll check those out. This has been a real pleasure making these videos, and I'm hoping that I'm adding some value out of this for your filmmaking skills to be brought up to the next level. And as always, guys, please stay creative and forge your creative future. I will see you guys on the next one. Take care.